Disclaimer: I don't own Star Wars. Summary: rejected by the Order, Anakin is about to give up his dreams to becoming a Jedi and freeing his mother. What happens when an old Jedi thought to be dead takes control of his training? Anakin was sitting outside a room while Obi-Wan was inside talking to Yoda about his future in the Jedi Order. He stared down at his hands, tugging at his sleeves nervously. That hall was extremely silent, only a few people walked by, glancing at the nervous little boy in the chair. When he finally heard the door open, he stood up as Obi-Wan walked out. What did he say? He asked anxiously. Sighing, the newly knighted Jedi crouched down on one knee in front of the boy. The council won't let me train you, he replied regrettably. Obi-Wan watched as the boy's face showed nothing but sadness and disappointment. I'm sorry, Anakin, he told him. What'll happen to me now? Anakin asked. Sighing, he looked at the boy. You'll be placed on the next ship back home to Tatooine, he replied. But I told my mom I wouldn't come home until it was time to free her, Anakin insisted. I promised. I'm sorry, Obi-Wan answered. Anakin lowered his head and walked away. The next morning, Anakin was standing by the ramp of the ship that was going to take him back home when Padme walked over in her handmaiden disguise. Have a safe trip, Anakin, she told him, hugging him gently. Anakin hugged her back. I want to see you again, he told her. We'll see each other again, she assured him, smiling. She rested her hands on her shoulders. Maybe on our next visit you can bring your mother, she told him, trying to keep him positive. Anakin looked around at the scenery that he could see from the platform. Mom would like this, he commented. Padme smiled, stroking his hair gently. It'll be all right, Ani, she assured him. Nodding his head slowly, he let out a sigh. Bye, Padme, he said quietly. Travel safely, Ani, she answered. Panaka made his way over to Padme. Milady, it's time to return to the palace, he informed. Nodding, she turned and followed him after giving Anakin one more smile. Once she was gone, Anakin went to get on the ship when he saw a cloaked figure suddenly standing there, making him jump back in surprise. Are you Anakin Skywalker? The person asked. Hearing the person's voice, it was obvious it was a woman speaking to him. Not knowing who this person was, the boy just stood there frozen in his place, unsure whether or not to tell her who he was. Yes, he answered slowly, against his better judgment. Who are you? Reaching up, the woman removed her hood, revealing that she had shoulder-length brown hair tied back and a ponytail and gray eyes. She stood in front of him wearing her black cloak and a brown skin-tight flexible bodysuit and brown boots. My name is Bastila Shan, she informed. You're a GD too? The boy asked. Used to be, she replied. How do you know who I am? Anakin asked. Bastila smiled a little. Your friend Obi-Wan sought me out, asking me to help you, she replied. How can you help me? Anakin asked. You want to be trained, right? To have a life better than one of a slave? She asked. That's what my mom wants. I just want to free my mom, Anakin replied. The woman nodded her head slowly. Come with me and I will train you, she told him. She held her hand out to him. If you want me to train you, she added. Anakin looked at her hand. Will I see my mom again? Will I see Padme again? He asked. Of course, I'm not going to cut you off from everyone you love and care for, she answered. Looking back at the palace where Padme had walked back then towards the ship they were going to have him board before looking back at Bastila. Slowly reaching up, he placed his hand in hers. Smiling, she led him over to her ship. Wow. Is that a dynamic class? Anakin asked, surprised as he looked at the ship. Yep, you know your ships, she commented. Anakin shrugged. I just like this kind of thing, he answered. I can tell, Bastila told him. This is the prodigal knight. Anakin grinned before they climbed on the ship, and Bastila flew off. So how can you train me if you're not a Jedi? Anakin asked. I know the ways of the Jedi, and I can teach you everything I know, she assured him. The boy was silent as he looked outside. Where are we going? He asked. Back to Tatooine, she replied. I'm going home? Anakin asked. Bastila nodded. Yes, the best way to teach you would be on familiar ground. So this way you are able to adjust to your training and your growing powers, she explained. Anakin sat back, he couldn't wait to see his mother again. The woman looked over with a smile to see the boy's excitement. When they arrived back on Tatooine, Anakin climbed off the ship. Anakin. Bastila called as the boy started running off. My mom's right over here, he told her anxiously. Patience, young one, patience, she told him softly. Anakin nodded, letting out a deep breath as he led his new master to his old home. Finding their little apartment, he opened the door. Mom. He called. Shmi walked out, surprised to see her son. Ani. She gasped to see her son. Anakin ran over, hugging his mother around the waist. Bastila saw the tears in Shmi's eyes as she hugged her son tight. "What are you doing back here, Ani?" she asked, kneeling in front of him. "The Jedi wouldn't let me into their order, Mom, but she's going to train me here so I can be close to you," Anakin replied, smiling. Shmi stood up. "And you are?" she asked. "Bastila Shan Ms. Skywalker," Bastila answered with a slight bow. "You are going to train my son?" "I thought Anakin said the Jedi order didn't take him?" Shmi asked. "They didn't, but I'm not a Jedi, but I am able to train your son to harness his abilities. He will be powerful, and he'll be able to have his attachment to you without having a code tearing that away," Bastila explained. Anakin smiled as he hugged his mother again. "You must understand though, Anakin, your training won't be all fun and games, it will be difficult," she informed. The boy nodded his head slowly in understanding. "You will be able to visit your mother once you have completed the assignments I have given you for the day," she added. "Yes, Master," he answered. "Just call me Bastila. I'm not a Jedi, so no need for the formalities," she informed. "Why is it that the order rejected Anakin?" "Qui-Gon was sure they would accept him," Shmi answered. Bastila looked at the boy. "Anakin, why don't you get your things that you weren't able to bring with you before?" she asked. Anakin nodded, hurrying to his room. They didn't accept him because Yoda stated that Anakin's future is clouded, which made the council unable to trust him. They also took his age in consideration, stating he was too old to be trained. "Not even Qui-Gon could convince them to train your son," she explained. "What did Qui-Gon say about you taking over Anakin's training?" Shmi asked. Bastila lowered her head slightly, letting out a sad sigh. "Qui-Gon was sadly killed while trying to fight a Sith," she replied. "His former Padawan, Obi-Wan, asked me to do his training." Shmi crossed her arms over her chest, lowering her head with a sad sigh over the news of Qui-Gon's death. "He gave my son hope," she informed softly. "With me training him, that hope will stay alive, Ms. Skywalker," Bastila answered. Shmi smiled softly, looking over at her son as he walked out of his room with an even smaller bag. "Is that everything?" Bastila asked. Anakin nodded his head slowly. "Where will you stay?" Shmi asked. "I will find us a home out in the desert. This way I can train Anakin, but he can see you as I said," Bastila replied. Anakin smiled, looking at his mother, hugging her again. Shmi hugged him back, stroking his hair gently. After dinner that evening, Bastila and Anakin began to leave the city. "Bastila, I would still like to free my mom from slavery," Anakin told her. The woman looked down at the child walking beside. "With dedication and a plan of how you are going to do it, I believe you can do as you had promised. Goals take a lot of time and dedication to get to. There are no shortcuts," she informed. Anakin sighed as he fixed a bag strap over his shoulder. "Except, once you reach your goal, you will feel accomplished to know all your hard paid off," she added. "Will I ever see Padme again?" he asked. "If you would like to see her again, same rules apply though. You have to finish the assignments I give you in order to be able to visit her," she answered. The boy lit up at the thought of seeing Padme again. They stopped when they arrived at a hovel. "Here we are," she said, smiling as they went inside. "You live here?" he asked. "Yes," she replied as she put her bag down. Anakin looked around. It did have a homey feeling to it as he ventured around. "Your room is right across from mine," Bastila informed. Walking into his room, he saw that it was already fixed up for him. Setting his bags down on the bed, he turned to look at Bastila. Did you know I was coming before Obi-Wan even asked?" he asked curiously. Bastila nodded. "I knew for years that you would be here," she replied. "Did you know Qui-Gon was going to die?" he asked. "The Force is complicated, Anakin. Not everything can be changed," she replied softly. Anakin lowered his head sadly. "Anakin," she said softly. She kneeled down before him. "I promise you that you will be great, you will become what Qui-Gon hoped you would be. You will become someone that Qui-Gon would be proud of," she added. Letting out a sigh, he raised his head to look at her. "I want to become someone Qui-Gon, Mom, and Padme would be proud of," he answered. Smiling, she patted his shoulder. "And you will be," she assured him before standing up. Anakin watched as she left the room and sat down on his bed with one of his model ships in his hands. He lied back on his pillow and smiled as he fell asleep with hope that he would become what he had dreamt of becoming. Bastila sighed as she removed her cloak, hanging it up before sitting down to meditate. She closed her eyes as she began opening herself up to the Force. "I have begun my mission, Revan. The Chosen One is under my protection," she said into the Force. She smiled, knowing that her mission to make sure Anakin became someone to keep the balance of the Force and to defeat the Sith once and for all. Anakin was jogging back to the hovel, his hair stuck to his head, and his shirt was soaked from the sweat from his morning training. "You did well today," Bastila told him, smiling as they stopped. She crossed her arms over her chest as he sat down. "Rest for a little while, but then we start your lightsaber training," she added. "All right," he answered, letting out a deep breath. She handed him the canteen of water with a smile. "You have done well this week, Anakin," she told him. "Thank you, Bastila," he answered. She smiled softly. "I think you deserve to see your mother tonight after you're done," she told him. Anakin's eyes lit up. "Really?" he asked. "Yes, you are able to have the night off," she assured him. "Great!" he exclaimed, jumping to his feet. She laughed softly at the boy's enthusiasm. "Shall we?" she asked as she pulled out her lightsaber. Anakin grinned as he pulled out his lightsaber, igniting both sides. "You may begin," she told him. Anakin grinned as he swung his lightsaber around several times before aiming it at Ballista's head. Ballista raised her weapon, blocking the attack easily. "Remember, the obvious move sometimes isn't the right one," she told him. Nodding, he caught her off guard when he kicked her in the stomach. Doing a backflip, she landed back on her feet with her lightsaber raised. She swung at the boy's head, making him duck, but then do a backflip as she took a swipe at his feet with the other side of her blade. Landing gracefully on his feet, Anakin blocked several blows aimed at him before trying his own attacks. Ballista smiled at the boy's improvement. He was a fast learner when it came to fighting techniques. He knew how to defend himself and to execute his own attacks. It was his personal feelings that she noticed what got him in trouble. She had to teach him to harness his personal feelings to help him with his fighting, then he could be unstoppable. Anakin swung his double lightsaber around again, swinging it in circles above his head, then around his back while aiming for her middle. Anticipating his attack, she blocked the blade that was aimed for her middle, shoving him back, and aimed for his shoulder. Anakin dodged her attack, kneeing her in the stomach before grabbing her shoulder and threw her to the ground. The impact made her drop her lightsaber, but before she could call for it, Anakin stepped on her wrist and held his lightsaber close to her head. "You have done well, my apprentice," she told him, smiling. Smiling, he deactivated his weapon before holding out his hand to help her up. "Thank you," he told her as he attached his weapon to his belt again. Ballista called for her weapon and attached it to her belt again. "You can go see your mother now," she told him. "Aren't you coming?" he asked. "Mom enjoys your visits too." Ballista laughed. "All right, let's go," she told him as they walked over to the speeder that sat beside the hovel. Anakin jumped into the driver's seat with a grin, making his trainer laugh before she got in next to him. "Don't drive so fast now," she told him. The young man let out a sigh. "Fine, ruin my fun," he muttered before driving off. When they arrived at a moisture farm, Anakin jumped out of the speeder. "Mom," he called, looking around with a smile. Shmi climbed out of the hovel with a smile. The young teenager hurried over, embracing his mother. "I swear you are growing more and more every time I see you," Shmi commented, stroking her son's hair. Anakin smiled as he rested his head on his mother's shoulder. Shmi continued to stroke her son's hair when Owen walked over from working in the moisture fields. "Hi, Owen," he greeted his stepbrother. "Hi," Owen answered. He let out a sigh. "Was it rough out there again, Owen?" Shmi asked gently. "It would work better if the blasted evaporators would stop breaking down," Owen muttered. Anakin stared at his stepbrother. "Can I see?" he asked, curiously. Owen let out a sigh. "He might surprise you, Owen," Shmi told her stepson. Nodding his head slowly, he led Anakin over to the broken evaporators. Ballista smiled at Shmi. "Shmi, a pleasure to see you again," she told the woman. "A pleasure to see you again, Ballista. How is my son doing in his training?" Shmi asked, smiling. "He's an exceptional student, very brilliant in all of his assignments I have given him," Ballista replied. "Good, I am very glad," Shmi told her, smiling. "You should be very proud of your son," Ballista told her. Shmi looked over at Anakin to see him working on the evaporators. "I'm very proud of him. Thank you for taking him in when everyone else gave up on his training," she told Ballista. The former Jedi nodded her head slowly. "Oh yes, Anakin has too much talent, too many abilities to just let him become a slave again, which I know is something you didn't want," Ballista answered. Shmi shook her head slowly. "He deserves a better life than one of a slave," she agreed softly. "I was once a mother myself, I know how you wish for something better for your child," Ballista answered. Looking over at her son's trainer, she raised her eyebrow. "What happened to your child, if you don't mind me asking?" she asked curiously. Ballista sighed sadly. "My child has passed away a long time ago," she said. "I'm sorry," Shmi murmured, regretting that she had asked. Ballista nodded her head slowly. It is quite all right, you didn't know, she assured the woman. The two women were silent when Shmi lifted her head and looked toward the hovel. As if Shmi suddenly remembered something, she looked back toward Anakin. "Ani," she called to her son. Anakin got up off the ground after hearing his mother calling for him. "What is it, Mom?" he asked, smiling. "You have a visitor who has been anxious to see you," Shmi replied. Furrowing his eyebrows in confusion, looking towards the hovel, his eyes widened. "Padme," he exclaimed when he saw the now 18-year-old queen exit the hovel. "Ani," Padme said, smiling. The 14-year-old ran over, hugging her tight. Padme hugged him back with a smile. "My goodness, have you grown, look at you," she said, smiling as she let him go. Anakin stared at her with a smile. "You've grown too, Padme, more beautiful I should say," he said, smiling. She laughed softly as she hugged him again. "How long are you staying?" he asked anxiously. "Only for a couple of days. Everyone back at the palace believe I have gone home to visit my family," she replied. The boy frowned slightly, sad that she couldn't stay longer. Padme rested her hand on his shoulder. "How is your training?" she asked. "It's great. Look at the lightsaber I constructed," he told her, stepping back. Bastila laughed as she watched the boy show off his weapon to the Queen of Naboo. "Incredible, you built that?" Padme asked. "Yeah," Anakin, as he swung it around a couple of times before deactivating it. Padme smiled. "You have grown so much," she said, smiling. Bastila smiled when she saw Anakin's eyes light up as he and Padme sat down to catch up. "I sense that there is more there than that boy will admit to himself," she commented, chuckling softly. Shmi looked at Bastila quizzically. "I thought he wouldn't have been allowed to care for her more than just a friend?" she asked. "That would be if he was training to be a Jedi, it would have been forbidden for him to care for Padme more than just a friend," Bastila replied. "Besides his training, he could live a somewhat normal life?" Shmi asked. "Somewhat, if this does become what I think it will, hopefully she'll understand that he won't be there all the time like a normal suitor," Bastila answered. Shmi shook her head slowly. "Anakin's only 14, too young to even be thinking about this," she commented, laughing softly. Bastila laughed. "This is true, very true," she answered. During his conversation with Padme, Anakin looked up when Klieg arrived from working in the fields. "Klieg, good to see you again, sir," he greeted, standing up to greet his stepfather. "Hello, Anakin, I'm glad to see that you were able to make it. Your mother was hoping you could take time out for one visit to at least see your friend here," Klieg commented, gesturing to Padme. "I'm glad I made it, how are you?" Anakin asked. "I'm doing all right, my boy, quite all right. The machines around here keep breaking down, but we are doing all right," Klieg answered. Anakin smiled. "Well, I think I fixed your evaporator problem," he commented as he led his stepfather over to the evaporators. Klieg bent down, looking at the contraptions, grinning. "Well, you did fix them," he commented. "Anakin can fix just about everything," Padme commented. "He did build a pod racer and C-3PO on his own." "This is true, even though Anakin, I think you should fix 3PO's personality," Owen commented. "3PO is fine just how he is," Shmi told her son, smiling. Anakin looked over at the protocol droid as he walked over. "Master Ani, it is so good to see you again," he commented. "Hi, 3PO," he answered. He walked around the droid, expecting the coverings on it. "Mom, you did great covering him up," he commented. "Mom had to, he wouldn't stop whining about the sand and his wires," Owen commented. They laughed a little before Anakin looked over at Padme as R2-D2 rolled over with his series of beeps. "Oh, sorry, you'll have to excuse me, I have to speak with Chancellor Palpatine," Padme informed before leaving to go to her ship. Anakin watched her go and let out a sigh. "A little crush, Anakin?" Owen teased, messing up his stepbrother's hair. Anakin gave him a small glare. "I wouldn't be talking, Owen, I've seen that you've looked at Beru Whitesun," he commented. Owen glared back, making Shmi laugh. "Enough, you two, enough," she told them. Both boys stopped their bickering, making Klieg chuckle lightly. "So Anakin, are you ever going to become a farmer like the rest of us?" Owen asked with a half grin. They laughed when they saw Anakin's eyes grow white at the idea. "Anakin's just not a farmer, won't ever be one," Shmi answered, laughing softly, patting her son's shoulder. "He has too many plans to stop it all to be a farmer," Bastila put in, resting her hand on Anakin's other shoulder. "As soon as my training is done, I'm going to come to Tatooine and free all the slaves," Anakin answered. Shmi smiled. "I'm sure you can succeed in your plans," she assured him, hugging her son tightly. Anakin smiled, letting out a sigh as he looked over at Bastila, who nodded her head slowly in agreement with his mother. Bastila knew all too well of Anakin's desire to free the slaves on Tatooine. She also knew that while he would be training and fighting for what was right in the galaxy, he would plan his own crusade here. Having watched this boy since he had arrived on Tatooine when he was 3, she watched as Gardulla the Hutt treated the boy and his mother like dirt. It disgusted her that there was nothing she could do to protect the boy without drawing attention. When they were sold to Watto, she was grateful that the junk shop owner was a little kinder than the Hutt. She waited patiently for the next few years to be able to fulfill the mission she accepted from Revan. She wouldn't fail him, she would make sure Anakin became what she had promised. A wonderful protector of the galaxy. Anakin smiled as they went into the hovel after Padme returned, enjoying his night off with everyone he loved and cared for. 4 years later, Anakin was carefully making his way through the jungle on Xun. His eyes continuously scanned the area for any sort of attacker. Suddenly getting the sensation something was behind him, he activated his double-sided lightsaber and did a backflip over his would-be attacker's head. Landing on his feet, he jumped back when the Maulra swung its long head around, turning its head sideways to grab Anakin in its large jaws. He jumped back again as it took a swipe at his head. Rolling across the ground, he aimed at the paw that was aimed for his head, stabbing his lightsaber through it. The creature let out a shriek of pain before running away. Letting out a deep breath, Anakin deactivated his lightsaber when he also began running. He leapt over the fallen trees that littered the jungle, trying to find his destination that Bastila sent him on. Just as Anakin went to turn a corner, he saw a Canuck standing in his path. "Force, do these things get uglier every time I see them," he muttered, wiping the sweat from his face. Igniting his lightsaber again, he jumped into the air as a Canuck tried running up behind him to headbutt him. He landed gracefully back on the ground, while one more creature came out of its hiding place. 3 against 1, seems almost unfair, he commented with a half-grin. Swinging his lightsaber around, he got into his fighting stance as the 3 Canucks ran at him at full force. He brought his lightsaber down, amputating one of the creature's legs. The middle Canuck let out a roar of pain, stumbling from the loss of its limb. He leapt off the ground, landing on a branch above his head as he looked at the creatures below. Unable to handle the injured Canuck's roars of pain, he removed his blaster that was on his belt and aimed it at the creature's head to put it out of its misery. Aiming his blaster at the other 2, he killed the other 2 before jumping out of the tree he was standing in. "That wasn't so bad," he commented. As he ran through the jungle again, Anakin found Bastila waiting by the ship. "What took you so long?" she asked with a grin. "You had to choose the path that had be filled with every obstacle imaginable," he commented. "What? You didn't care for the Screeve attack you had to go through yesterday?" she asked. "That was the challenge I enjoyed," he answered with a grin. He wiped the sweat from his brow again. "For the record, it wasn't just one Screeve, it was a whole flock of Screeves," he added. "Details," she answered nonchalantly with the wave of her hand. She chuckled lightly. "You're not done yet," she added. Anakin raised his head when he suddenly got his bad feeling again. "I have a really bad feeling about this," he told her. "Do you now?" "Let's see if you can defeat your next opponent," she told him. Looking to the side, he saw a dark figure in the jungle. A Zakig came out of its hiding spot with a growl. "Bastila," he started when he saw that she was gone. "Force, I hate it when she does that." The large predator charged at Anakin at full force, not giving the young man a chance to draw any of his weapons. Grabbing the creature by its horns, he jumped up onto its head when it tried attacking his middle with its teeth. Running up on the back, he was thrown off the creature, hitting the ground hard. Groaning, he rolled out of the way as it tried to plow him. Jumping back to his feet, he went to pull out his blaster when he was hit in the middle of his back, making him sprawl across the ground. Grabbing his lightsaber from his belt, he ignited one side when the creature tried to stomp on him. Only getting rid of a horn, the Zakig roared in pain before Anakin jumped back to his feet, his lightsaber going into the creature's side, only making it scream more in pain. Getting now extremely irritated with its prey, it went to take a swipe at Anakin's middle, making him jump back before its foot could connect. When the creature tried again, Anakin ignited the other side of his lightsaber, his weapon only cutting its leg. The creature roared in pain and tried again. Anakin once more dragging his lightsaber across the creature's side. Stopping completely, Anakin leapt up onto the creature's back. As it was thrashing about, Anakin gripped its back with one hand while raising his lightsaber with his other hand. Raising his weapon above his head, he plunged it through its head, the creature falling dead on the jungle floor. Getting down, Anakin leaned forward with his hands on his knees as he was trying to catch his breath. "Well done, Anakin," Bastila told him. She patted his shoulder. "My friend Mandalore the Preserver would be proud," she commented. "Thank you, Bastila," he answered between breaths. Now, I think you deserve a good long break, she told him. He stood up straighter with a smile. I would like to go to Tatooine first and get my mother, he told her. Bastila nodded with a smile. Of course, she answered as they went to board their ship. After they had picked Shmi up from Tatooine, Anakin smiled as he was dressed better than what he had been wearing for his training on Sun. Shmi smiled as she sat beside her son. You are planning something, she commented. Whatever do you mean, Mom? He asked innocently. Because you have this glint in your eye that I just can't place, Shmi told him. Anakin cleared his throat. Mom, I think you'll like Naboo. It is a lot more beautiful than Tatooine. Trees, flowers, waterfalls, he told her, changing the subject. Anakin, she started. Mom, just trust me, all right? He asked, smiling at her. Shmi smiled as she kissed her son's cheek. All right, I'll trust you, she answered, chuckling. She kissed his cheek once more before settling back in her seat. When they arrived on Naboo, Anakin smiled as he got off the ship, helping his mother down the ramp. Ani, stop, I am not a fragile being, she scolded while laughing. Sorry, he answered, chuckling. Bastila laughed when Shmi looked around with wide eyes. This place it's magnificent. She gasped in disbelief. Different from Tatooine, isn't it? He asked, smiling. So much, Shmi answered quietly. Anakin pulled his hood over his head as he continued walking. Anakin, what are you doing? She asked, raising her eyebrow. Just trying to hide my identity, Mom, he answered. It's for his training reasons, Shmi, don't worry, Bastila told her. Shmi nodded her head slowly as they continued walking to the palace. Walking inside, Anakin looked around for his girlfriend. Seeing Sabe, he smiled softly. Sabe, he called quietly. Looking over, she smiled to find the Queen's secret bow standing there waiting for her. Anakin, welcome back to Naboo, she greeted quietly. Thank you, he answered, smiling. But she's not here, she told him. He frowned slightly. Where is she then? He asked quietly. She had returned to visit her family in Theed, she replied. He nodded his head slowly. Thank you, he told her. You are welcome, she answered, smiling. Anakin bowed slightly to her before leaving the palace. She's in Theed, he told them. They followed them. Shmi was extremely curious about what her son was planning. When they arrived at the Naberry home, Anakin removed his hood when he found the house. Two young girls came out of the house to go play in the backyard when they spotted Anakin. Anakin! They exclaimed excitedly, running over to greet him. Ryu, Puha, he said, smiling as he knelt down on one knee to embrace the girls. The girls giggled excitedly as they hugged Anakin tighter before he stood up. Mom, these are Padme's nieces, Ryu and Puha, he informed. Shmi smiled at the children. It is nice to meet you, both of you, she told them, smiling. The girls waved. Where's your aunt? He asked, smiling. We'll get her. Aunt Padme. Aunt Padme. They shouted, running up the stairs. Anakin chuckled before they went inside. Entering the house, Shmi looked around, still amazed by the beauty of this place. Anakin, hello, Jobel greeted as she walked over to him. Anakin smiled as he embraced his girlfriend's mother. Hello, Mrs. Naberry, he greeted. Enough with the formalities, it's Jobel, she insisted. Sorry, Jobel, he answered, smiling. He rested his hand on Shmi's shoulder. Jobel, I would like you to meet my mother, Shmi Lars. Mom, this is Padme's mother, Jobel Naberry, he informed. It is a pleasure to finally meet you. Anakin can't stop talking about you when he's visiting, Jobel told her, smiling. It is lovely to meet you, Shmi answered, smiling. Please call me Shmi. Then you should call me Jobel, the other woman told her. Anakin. Another voice exclaimed. Anakin laughed as Padme's sister hurried over, embracing him. Welcome back to Naboo, we have been waiting for you to come back, Sola told him. Hello, Sola, he answered, smiling, letting her go. Sola looked at Shmi, and her smile only grew. This must be your mother? It is finally wonderful to meet you. I'm Sola, Padme's sister, she informed. Hello, Shmi answered, smiling. The two women greeted Bastila, who nodded to them with a courteous smile. Anakin, welcome back. Padme has been counting the days for your return, Rowie commented. Thank you, it is wonderful to be back, Rowie, he answered, shaking his hand. Rowie patted his back. And who is this lovely young lady? He asked with a grin. Anakin chuckled lightly. Rowie, my mother, Mom, this is Padme's father, he informed. Shmi shook his hand. Lovely to meet you. I can see where Padme gets her lovely personality, she commented. You should be proud of her. Oh, we are. Just as much as you should be proud of your boy, Rowie commented. I'm very proud of my son, Shmi answered, smiling at Anakin. Anakin looked over when the girls Padme inside. Just seeing her again made his heart race. Padme," he murmured. In just a few steps he had her in his arms. Padme smiled as she wrapped her arms tightly around his neck as he lifted her up off the floor. "Annie," she said with a sigh, burying her face into his neck. "I've missed you so much," he told her softly. "I've missed you. I had no idea when I was going to see you again," she said, smiling as he set her back down. Anakin smiled as he kissed her tenderly, resting his hands on the sides of her neck. "Alright, you two, there are children present," Sola teased, "as well as your parents." They pulled apart and Padme blushed, but still gave her sister a small glare. "Lunch is just about ready. I hope you three brought your appetite," Jobel said, smiling. "We wouldn't want to intrude," Shmi insisted. "Nonsense, you are practically family," Sola answered, smiling. "Shmi, it's so nice to see you," Padme said, smiling as she hugged Anakin's mother. Shmi hugged her back. "I swear you grow prettier every time I see you," she insisted, smiling. Padme smiled before they sat down. "Bastila, it's great to see you as well," Padme told her. "As it is to see you again, milady," Bastila answered with a slight bow before sitting down. "So this is quite a lovely surprise to have you all here," Jobel commented. "Anakin has been quite secretive all day," Shmi commented, raising her eyebrow at her son. Anakin cleared his throat. "I promise you the wait is all worth it," he assured them. Padme smiled as she rested her hand on Anakin's arm. Smiling softly at her, he kissed her forehead while pulling her a little closer. After they ate, Padme smiled as she and Anakin watched Jobel show Shmi around the gardens. "Your mother looks extremely happy," she commented. "She's been on Tatooine most of her life, she's fascinated by all the beautiful things on this planet," he replied, smiling. Padme held his hand with a sigh. "I've missed you," she told him softly. Halting in mid-step, he turned around and embraced her again. "I've missed you, Padme," he answered softly, hugging her close. She buried her face into his neck, closing her eyes, reveling in the comfort of his embrace. 9 years ago, Anakin was disappointed that the Jedi had rejected him from their order. Now that he was older and able to understand more what he would have given up, he was now grateful that he was rejected from the order. He was able to train with Bastila, but then afterwards he could return to either Tatooine or Naboo to visit the two women that meant everything to him. Letting her go, Anakin ran his hands over her arms. "What do you have planned? You seem kind of distracted all afternoon since you've been here," she commented. Anakin smiled a little, letting out a deep breath. "Padme, I hope you know how much you mean to me," he said gently. "Of course I do," she answered, smiling, resting her hand on his cheek. He rested his hand over hers before holding both of her hands in his. Padme's eyes widened when he slowly got down on one knee in front of her. "Angel, you are everything to me. I would do anything for you. If you asked for the galaxy, I would do what I can to give it to you. I don't have all the riches of a normal suitor to give you everything that you deserve. All I have is my heart, and I am giving it to you wholeheartedly. I promise that I will do what I can to make you the happiest woman in the universe," he told her. Reaching into the small pouch on his utility belt, he pulled out a ring. It was obviously handmade with a smooth piece of metal that he had cut off from a rod end. He had welded designs around the metal band and used wires to create the setting with a beautiful green pearl sitting on top of the wired setting. "Padme Naberries, will you do me the honor and the privilege of becoming my wife?" he asked as he held the ring up. Padme smiled, squeezing his hand. "Of course I will," she replied, smiling with unshed tears shining in her eyes. Smiling, he took her hand and slipped the ring onto her finger, grateful that it fit. Instead of looking at the ring, she wrapped her arms tightly around his neck with a small laugh as he stood up with his arms around her waist, swinging her around in a circle. "Congratulations," Sola said excitedly as she embraced them both once they let each other go. After embracing her sister, Padme laughed as Sola looked at the ring. "This is gorgeous," she told her sister, beaming. "That is a crate dragon pearl, very difficult to find," Anakin said with a half grin. "So this is what you worked on for weeks when you thought everyone had gone to bed," Shmi quipped as she embraced her son. Anakin chuckled lightly, hugging his mother back. "Congratulations, both of you," Shmi told them, smiling as she embraced Padme next. They smiled as the family congratulated them on their engagement. Later that evening, after they had a quiet family celebration about the engagement, Anakin was sitting outside in the gardens looking up at the starry sky. Padme walked out wearing a pale purple off-the-shoulder dress that had long, skin-tight sleeves that ended at her wrists. An empire waist that had a few crystals sewn into the bodice and a light blue ribbon tied around her waist. Her hair was tied in a braid, her hair hanging over her right shoulder. "What are you doing out here by yourself?" she asked, smiling. Looking over, Anakin smiled as she sat next to him. "You look so beautiful," he told her, stroking her cheek. "I wish you kept your hair down though." "I'll keep that in mind," she answered, smiling, kissing him briefly. Anakin held her hand in his, tracing his thumb over her engagement ring. "Sola is dying to know when the wedding is going to take place," she commented, laughing softly. "I think she's more excited about this than anyone else," he commented, chuckling lightly. Padme rested her head on his shoulder as she twisted her ring on her finger. "I think we should discuss it a little bit before you leave at the end of this week," she said softly. Wrapping his arms, he kissed the side of her head. "Do you have anything in mind, Angel?" he asked gently. She ran her hand over his arm. "Well, I would like to get married in the Lake Country. It's beautiful, picturesque. It would be perfect because we can keep it quiet like how we want it," she answered. "This is true," he agreed, smiling. "We have the location. The question now is when." Padme bit her lower lip. "I don't see it happening anytime soon," she murmured. Anakin nodded his head slowly. "Not anytime soon," he answered. "Well, it's only because of your training and my reigning as queen. I think we should get married when we can actually enjoy it," she commented. "I'm not arguing, Padme," he assured her, chuckling. Smiling, she wrapped her arms tightly around him. "Let's put it this way, we'll get married when we feel the time is right," he added. She nodded in agreement. "When the time is right," she agreed. Anakin wrapped his arms around her, kissing the side of her head as they sat together in a comfortable silence, looking up at the stars together. Anakin had arrived back home on Tatooine, having finished a mission Bastila had sent him on. However, this time it was different. This time he had a feeling something horrible was about to happen. He couldn't understand what it was, but he just knew something horrible was going to happen. As he sat outside his mother's house, the early morning began to show across the sky. Meaning his mother would be waking up soon to collect the mushrooms on the evaporators as he learned she usually did in the morning. As he watched his mother collect the mushrooms, he saw Tuscan Raiders sneaking up on her. Taking his chance, Anakin ran forward with his lightsaber drawn, severing a Raider's arm as he reached out to grab his mother from behind. "Back, you mindless beasts," Anakin snapped. He looked over his shoulder. "Mom, go back inside, go," he told her. Shmi hurried back inside while her son fought against the sand people who had threatened his mother's life. One tried to bring his gaffy stick down onto Anakin's head. The young man dodged the attack, kicking the attacker in the side. As Anakin fought against him, several more Tuscan Raiders surrounded him. Shmi was inside watching her son fight them. "He's going to get killed," Beru exclaimed in horror. "Not Anakin, he's stronger than he seems," Shmi assured her. Anakin grinned as a Tuscan charged at him. He jumped over his head, kicking another in the side of the head as he tried to grab him. When one tried to sneak up behind him, he thrust his lightsaber behind him, the blade going through its stomach. After seeing several of their comrades fall to the ground dead, the rest of the Tuscans ran off frightened. Anakin deactivated his lightsaber and pulled off his hood. Turning around, he smiled as Shmi climbed out of the hovel, hurrying over to embrace her son. "Hi, Mom," he murmured, hugging her tight. "Are you alright?" He pulled back, holding onto her arms. "I'm quite alright," she assured him, smiling softly. Anakin smiled when the rest of the family came out. "You know how to make an entrance, little brother," Owen quipped, messing up Anakin's hair. "You're only older than me by a few months," Anakin answered with a playful glare as he shoved Owen. Owen shoved back, with a grin. Hey, enough you two," Shmi scolded. "Sorry, Mom," both young men said in unison. Shmi laughed softly. "Thank you, Anakin, those beasts have been running around the farm grounds for the last few weeks," Klieg commented. Anakin glanced over his shoulder. "They are easily frightened, but they do come back with more numbers, shelters are better bet," he answered. Klieg, Shmi, and Beru went back inside, while Owen and Anakin decided to burn the dead bodies that littered the ground. After a while, they went back inside where the rest of the family was waiting for them. "So Anakin, Mom told us you're engaged," Beru said, smiling. Anakin smiled a little. "Yes, I am. Sorry for my quick departure the last time I was here, but Bastila and I had a mission to go on," Anakin answered. "Speaking of Bastila, where is she?" Shmi asked curiously. "She heard from an informant about a dealing with Count Dooku," Anakin replied. Anakin sighed. "So have you seen or spoken to Padme since your engagement?" Beru asked, trying to keep the conversation light. He looked over at her with a small smile. "I've talked to her between missions, but I haven't actually seen her face to face in 4 months," he replied. Shmi rested her hand on her son's arm with a comforting smile. "I'll stay here for a couple of weeks, but then I'm going to go to Naboo. She's getting ready to go to Coruscant for the vote against creating an army," he replied. "An army?" Shmi asked. "Why would they want to build an army?" Beru asked. Not sure, but I find it all too strange, Anakin replied. He pinched the bridge of his nose, stifling a yawn. Shmi laughed softly. Anakin, you're exhausted, she told her son standing up. No, Mom, I'm all right, he assured her. Owen chuckled lightly. Anakin, come on. You've traveled and fought Tuscan Raiders, I think you deserve to rest a little bit. Come on. We have chores to do anyways, let's go, Shmi told him. Anakin sighed as he let his mother pull him up, and she practically dragged him to his room. 2 weeks later, Anakin arrived on Naboo, walking down the ramp, he pulled up his hood as he walked toward the palace. Knowing the time, he knew Padme would be in a meeting with Queen Jamilia. Shaking his head slowly with a slight chuckle, he couldn't help but think of how busy his bride-to-be had to keep herself. Since he had no room to talk, he had his own responsibilities that kept him away as well. Walking up the stairs to the palace, Anakin quietly made his way down the hall to Padme's office. Sabe smiled, recognizing the cloaked figure immediately, letting him inside. She'll be finished soon, she informed quietly. Thank you, he answered as he went to stand in a corner to wait for her. Padme walked down the hall with her datapad in her hand. Sabe, do you have all my things ready for my trip to Coruscant? She asked. Of course, everything is all set. Don't worry, everything will be under control here, Sabe assured her. Padme smiled before she went to go into her office. Could you inform Cord that and Orm that they'll be coming to Coruscant with me? She asked. Of course, Sabe answered smiling. And Captain Tifo? The Queen insists that he comes with me as well, Padme told her. Padme, will you calm down? I have everything under control, Sabe assured her friend. Padme smiled a little, letting out a sigh. You need to relax a little. Maybe after this vote you can finally have a break and plan that wedding with that fiancé of yours, Sabe teased lightly. Padme raised her eyebrow. I told you that we're holding off on that until his training is over with, she answered as she looked down at her datapad again. So? Doesn't mean you can't make plans, Sabe told her. Sabe, Padme said with a sigh, it wouldn't be much fun planning a wedding if Anakin's not here to give his own ideas. I truly doubt it'll matter to him, the other girl answered. Padme shook her head slowly. I have work to do, she informed, going into her office. As always, Sabe said with a mock bored yawn as she went back to work. Shaking her head again, the senator laughed softly as she walked into her office. As soon as the doors closed, she realized she wasn't alone. Looking up, she nearly screamed until she realized who it was. Anakin Skywalker, what are you doing? She demanded, clearly irritated that he was hiding on her. Surprise, he answered with a grin. Padme shook her head slowly when a smile appeared on her face. Walking over, she embraced him tightly. Wrapping his arms tightly around her back, he lifted her up off the floor as he buried his face into her neck. I wasn't expecting to see you for another month, she murmured. I finished my mission earlier than expected, he answered, setting her back down on the floor. Besides, Sabe has been sending me those threatening messages you had been receiving. Padme let out a sigh. Sometimes I feel like I should hire another assistant, she commented. Why? Because she's telling me what you should be telling me. He asked as he leaned against a wall behind him. I think they're just empty threats, she answered, waving it off. Padme, your life is being threatened and you're taking it lightly when you shouldn't be, he told her as she sat down at her desk. Padme looked up at him. Ani, I just have too much work to do, worry about empty threats, she told him. What if these aren't just empty threats? Padme, I really don't think it's a good idea for you to go to Coruscant, he answered. She looked at him as if he had grown an extra head. I have been working to vote against a military creation act, and I deserve the right to be there as its fate is decided, she answered. At what cost though? He asked. I would like in the next year or so to be marrying you. I would like that too, she replied as she sifted through the pile of datapads that littered her desk. Yes, but how will that happen if you get killed? He asked. Padme was silent. Stop talking nonsense, please, she answered, standing up. This isn't nonsense, Padme, this is your life. He exclaimed. Anakin, enough. She told him, turning around to look at him. Anakin was silent. I'm worried about your safety, he told her. That's why I'm going to Coruscant with several bodyguards, she answered. Walking over, he stood in front of her, holding onto her arms. I'm going with you, he told her. Ani, you can't. I'm sure Bastila has a mission for you to go on, she answered. She's arriving on Naboo later today and I'm going to talk to her, he informed. Padme sighed when he placed his hands on the sides of her neck, kissing her gently. She kissed him back, resting her hands on his sides. Pulling away, he rested his forehead against hers. When do you leave for Coruscant? He asked. Tomorrow, she replied. He nodded his head slowly. I'll meet you at your parents' house tonight, I have to go, he told her. I love you, she told him. Anakin smiled, kissing her once more. I love you, he answered. Padme watched him go and let out a sigh as she went back to her desk to go back to work. Walking out of the palace, Anakin had his hood over his head when he saw Bastila's ship land. Smiling, he made his way over to greet her. Bastila, hello, he greeted. Hello Anakin, Bastila answered smiling. Anakin noticed an astro droid was pulling along a long mahogany-colored case. What's that? He asked. The reason why I'm here, she replied as they continued walking. Still confused, he followed his trainer to the set of small apartments Bastila stays in whenever they're on Naboo. Walking into the apartment, they both removed their hoods, sitting down. What's going on? He asked. You want to talk to me about going to Coruscant with Padme, she stated, instead of asking. Yes, he replied. When you've been practicing the Force for many years, Anakin. You are able to open your mind further to visions, she informed. Anakin stared, letting out a sigh. Padme's life is in danger, Bastila, what do I do? He asked. You go with her, she replied. He was surprised by what she said. This is your mission, Anakin, she told him. Using the Force, she had the case settle carefully on the table between them. She unlocked the locks that covered the case. You're going to need this to hide yourself from everyone, she added. She smiled softly. Only your closest allies will know it's you, she informed. Giving her a quizzical look, he removed the lid of the case, revealing a mask, shoulder armor, arm shields, and torso armor. He lifted the mask up, staring at it. Armor? He asked. It's stronger than any armor I know. It can protect you when you are unable to, but it will also hide your identity, she replied. What is it made of? He asked. Mandalmetal, she replied. Mandalorian? He asked. Yes, she replied. Anakin put the mask back on. Stand up, she told him. Standing up, he stood there as Bastila took the armor from the case, putting it on him piece by piece. After she attached the torso piece of his armor, Anakin looked at all the protection he had. Bastila picked up the mask and Anakin took it, sliding the mask over his head. You look frightening to all your enemies, but the ones closest to you will feel protected, she told him. Grabbing his cloak he had discarded so she could put on the armor, she fastened it around his neck and smiled a little as she stepped back. Where did you get this? He asked as he continued to examine his armor. It's a long story, Anakin, she assured him. Leaving it at that, Anakin looked at himself in the mirror. He looked truly intimidating, in the armor. With the mask and everything he was beyond unrecognizable. Even when he spoke his voice was a little different. He attached his lightsaber to his belt before pulling the hood up. This should help me protect Padme, he answered. And it will, Bastila answered. Walking over, she rested her hands on his shoulders. Your enemies won't stand a chance against you, Anakin. You will become what you always talked about, she told him. Anakin nodded, smiling behind his mask. He had the tools to keep Padme safe, all he had to do now was use them.